Good morning, Brian Rollo, and good morning to anyone who's joined us here on LinkedIn this morning. It is Thursday, so must mean it's Thursdays with Culture Talk. I am Teresa Agresta, one of the co-founders here at Culture Talk. And if you are new to this conversation, Culture Talk is a platform that allows organizations to make culture a tangible asset, something that can be used in many different ways to enhance and improve performance, productivity, team building, mergers, acquisitions. There's so many ways that culture really touches everything in an organization. And we look at that culture conversation from two different perspectives. And so we have two different assessment tools to help establish what is the culture of an organization and who are the individuals and the people who make that come to life. And so the connection between the organizational culture and the human beings is really the intersection at which we find ourselves for today's conversation and the topic that we're going to lead this morning. So you'll see that I have Brian Rollo here with Brian Rollo Consulting. He's going to introduce himself in more detail in just a minute. But I wanted to just, give a few words on our topic for today. And that is team development. How does understanding your culture have a positive impact on team development? This is one of 6 critical paths that we have been exploring over the course of 2023. And it's our 4th path that we're looking at. So these 2 months over the summer of July and August, we're diving into this topic of team development and gaining clarity around that all important components of our cultures. And how does it matter and why does it matter for teams to have better interactions, collaboration, and effectiveness sort of kind of within the team, between the human beings on the team? And also, how can understanding culture help to improve those same things between teams? So that all important rub we're always hearing about between, the engineering and the sales team, the sales and the marketing team, the executives and the frontline managers. How does understanding culture help that conversation between teams? So I thought, what better way to have this conversation than to ask Brian to join me, because Brian has been a certified partner with Culture Talk. For how long now, Brian? How many years? I think.
It has to be over 40, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Um, and would love for you to share with us a little bit about your background, how you came to be operating your business, and how you deploy the Culture Talk tools in your business as we dive into this, really juicy topic around team development.
Yeah, so like a lot of people who do the kind of work I do, I'm sort of a refugee from corporations, a refugee from
Uh-huh.
corporate America, who spent a lot of time in that sort of professional setting, did a lot of different things, eventually ended up in sort of a training and development management role, and got to a point where I thought, boy, I'd love to take what I know and bring it to an even wider audience. And it was that sort of very naive but basic principle or value that I decided to step out and do this. So now, I call myself a coach and consultant. So I help people around leadership and culture issues. And so the Culture Talk tool is one of the first that I had, one of the first things I came across. And I was fortunate enough to be introduced to it very early on. And it became a foundational part of what I do and something I've used almost since I first became certified and continue to use, as you know.
Yeah, awesome. So when you say it's foundational, maybe describe a typical engagement and the ways in which you plug in these two components so that people will understand when we get deeper into the benefits of using the tool, how you're beginning from that perspective.
So, of course, it always starts with talking to a potential client, figuring out what they're trying to solve.
Mhm.
What goal are they trying to get to? And having the two different tools is outstanding, because sometimes I talk to people and they really want to focus on the individuals. They want to help their people communicate better. They want to increase collaboration, all the stuff you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's their goal. And then other times they want to take a step back and say, let's think about our culture as a whole. Let's think about who we are. Are we communicating that message clearly? Do we even really know?
Yeah.
And are we communicating it clearly? And if so, how can we design a culture? I like to use that term. How can we design a culture that's really us and then integrate it into everything we do? So that's where the organizational assessment might come a little bit more into.
Mm-hmm. Great. And you've become kind of known for your expertise in working with teams and, really leading them through step by step. How do we improve the, outcomes from a particular team? And I'm curious if you could share a little bit about that. What are some of the types of challenges you see kind of on repeat working in teams? And maybe, how do you then begin with that individual assessment as a starting point? Like, what would that look like? And what kind of experiences or examples can you share?
Sure. Well, for me, Teresa, it starts with sort of a foundational assumption, which I have found to be true more often than not. And that is, most people, and by most, I mean 90%, if not more, have good intentions. Right? They're coming to work. They want to get along with other people. They want to enjoy their work. They would love for everybody to work together and get things done. And I found in the vast, vast majority of the cases, that's true. But it doesn't.
And I love that. I love that you start with that. And I agree. Definitely sort of starting out, and it's not Pollyanna-ish. It's just human nature, right? I think you're right.
Yeah, but it doesn't always happen, right?
Yeah, this is true too.
Somewhere along that journey, like, we get off course a little bit, and that is human nature, and it's magnified in a work setting, I think. And it's magnified when we have different goals and different responsibilities and different teams. There's so many ways for these little micro fractures of a culture to start coming.
Right. What's interesting? I'm just thinking about right now. So when the workflow is designed, that's not taken into account. So when the perception of how are we going to get work done and how long will the work take and what will the outcomes be, I don't think anybody designs in the fractures that start to happen. So there's an interesting disconnect there between the work design and the human component.
Yeah, exactly. And before long, these little problems start coming up, and we find ourselves, if we stop and measure, after a while, far from where we wanted to be. Culture is
that hurts.
It does. And again, this is with the best of intentions.
Yeah.
So part of my job, again, is coming in and saying, well, exactly what's going on. And if we assume everybody has the best intentions, how can we sort of shine a light on maybe some of the things that have gotten in our way? And how can we co-create a solution? So it's not necessarily about me coming in and being the genius. It is me coming in and shining.
I'm sure you're the genius. I'm sure.
Well, it's not. Again, my job is to sort of create the pathway and guide people down it. The way I see it. And when I do that and I get out of the way and allow that to happen while still guiding the process, people come get to where they need to be. So to answer your other question, what are some of the common problems? We can probably guess it. One of the things I get a lot is, I don't know if I'm just fortunate, Teresa, or if that's the way most people are, but I've been fortunate to work with a lot of clients that are basically nice people. They're nice.
Well, like attracts like, Brian.
They're nice, polite people.
Yeah.
And they come in and they don't want to stir things up and they want to get along with everybody, and that is great. But that can sometimes lead to a fear of having conversations that need to happen. And that takes us down the path of repressing what we really feel, which leads us down the path of sort of passive aggressive behaviors coming up.
Yeah. Conflict avoidance, right? And its best.
Yeah, exactly. And again, with the best of intentions.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't even necessarily understand, A, that they've gone down that path at all, and B,
Right.
why that's happened.
Right. Well, that just speaks to the nature of archetype. And I know we haven't gotten into archetype as the mechanism that Culture Talk uses, but there's that, consistency, and it's a continuum of, on the strength of the pattern is the best intention and the way that I see it. And when the passive aggressiveness comes out, that's, the shadow side of several patterns, right? There are several patterns that might land when people are avoiding or, just under stress. They might land with that passive aggressiveness. I mean, what have you seen? What kinds of patterns have you seen show up in passive aggressiveness?
A lot. So, one of the big ones, of course, is, and I think we could tie a lot of these into different types of archetypes, but helping people understand the archetypes helps them understand the behavior without pointing fingers, if that makes any sense. So I want to point that out before I start saying this, because I'm not coming in and saying you're doing this. We're teaching about how the archetypes work, and then inviting them to self-assess.
Yeah.
So one of the big ones, of course, that happens when we're conflict avoidant is I get really mad at Teresa, but I don't want to tell Teresa. So what do I do? And there's a whole pathway we can walk them down, right? And
I tell everybody else, right?
It starts with me avoiding Teresa.
Uh-huh.
And then we never solve our problems. And then we become more distant. And then I continue to get madder. And then I start to talk to my neighbor about Teresa. Can you believe what Teresa did to me? Tell me all the bad things she's done to you. And then we start to form these factions, right? And before long, we have factions inside the same team. And if we get too far down that path, it can start to really affect work. It can start to affect how projects get completed or they don't get completed to the degree that we're able to do our work. And even if the smallest part, as soon as I start avoiding you, even if it doesn't get that bad, we're shutting down the communication we need to be able to do our jobs effectively, and work starts to become unpleasant for both of us.
Right. So it's like that little micro step, right? Right at that micro step, things start to shift. But how can we use the assessment and the understanding of what's happening, what's really going on here, right? Because a lot of times those triggers are not even about the other person. Oftentimes those triggers might be about something going on for yourself. But the archetypes really help us to uncover that.
And again, if you were to show up to one of my workshops, you'd hear me say this several times. It's not about blame. It's not about beating yourself up. Here's the thing. We're all human, right? we all, this is in us, right? This is in us. Most of us don't like conflict. Most of us would rather avoid it. And then we just if we're not careful, we end up down this path. And again, it's not with bad intentions, but we don't have to stay there.
And that's a relief, right? Like, I wonder how teams react when you say, there's a way, here's a path out.
And it's really as simple as just becoming aware that it's happened. And again, you don't have to judge yourself. You don't have to beat yourself up. You're not a bad human. If you've fallen into a little bit of passive aggressiveness, it is part of our human nature, but we can become aware of it. And once we become aware of it, then we're in a position where we can start shifting some of that behavior back to a little bit healthier behavior.
Yeah. So when you think about a team, what's the natural starting point? Is the leadership a better place to start than the rest of the team? How have you seen it work most effectively? And maybe you could give us an example of a pattern, an archetype that you've measured that played itself out, and how that awareness actually starts the ripple effect going the other way.
Yeah. So again, it depends what we're solving for, right? It depends the goal of the organization. But if somebody comes to me and says, boy, I'd really like my team to communicate better, or I'd like them to work together a little bit more collaboratively, we're going to do everybody. We're going to do everybody together. So I'm certainly going to talk to the leader, the people who brought me in. I'm going to explain what's happening. I'm going to certainly give them a little preview. All right, when we get to here, this is sort of how this is going to go. And we're going to walk them through to the degree that they want to know. But we're going to sit in that room and we're going to talk about it together. I think it's the only way for it really to happen well is for the leader to experience it with their people.
Right. And to be as vulnerable. And I think that's an important part of this journey. And I think a real value that the archetypes bring is the kind of ability or the natural outcome of dropping people into a safe place that allows them to be vulnerable. And then it opens a door to a deeper conversation, a more authentic conversation.
Absolutely. So for this kind of work, again, you need people to feel safe right from the start. And that does require a conversation. It does require setting some boundaries.
A commitment to safety.
A commitment to safety, and you as a facilitator certainly keeping things where they should be. But also, like you said, a big part of it comes from the leadership. And many times I'm going to ask them to go first, right? I'm going to ask them to be vulnerable first to the degree that they feel comfortable, because once they do, it gives everybody else permission. Because it can be sort of a scary thing if you're my boss and somebody says, all right, Brian, now be vulnerable. Tell me what you really think. And my boss is sitting right next to me, right?
Right, absolutely.
It can be a little scary. So part of that is, again, the leader going through with their people, and for that leader to sort of set the pattern. It makes me think of, I know we're not here to talk about your work, but some work I did with you last year, right? When that leader got up and told his own story in that case and was really super vulnerable. And then anybody else had said, well, if you can go up there and say that, I guess I can say what I really think. So
yeah. He really opened the door in that case, in that instance. He really opened the door for his people to step up and to step in. And what a powerful example he set. And, really changed the energy in that room that day and moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I found that to be most helpful again. And then we're going to go through the archetypes. Again, I don't know how much you want me to walk through this, but we're going to talk about the archetypes together. We're going to do a little bit of education, and we're going to let people sort of self-select. Now, they'll generally have done an assessment before, so they have an assessment that says, here's the way we see it based on the questions you answered for us. But then we're going to go through it together. We're going to let them sort of self-select. Yeah, this is me. This is not so much me. And then we're going to talk about it.
Right. So starting with the leader again, sort of like, let's talk about the outcomes. Let's talk about what you have seen happen sort of in that day, but then moving forward, because this is the kind of work that, there is a big now what. It's not just a nice team building experience and a great day where everybody got vulnerable. There is a, desired, as you pointed out, desired goals and outcomes and real needs that the business has when they first bring you in. So what are some of those observable outcomes, and why do clients, and I know they do, keep calling you back and asking you to build on that and also to expand to another team? That's been the impact for your business, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think I quite answered your other question either about what I see, but let's say again, I have somebody who calls me in and says, boy, again, my people aren't talking to each other. I know they're going off and they're talking to each other, but they're not talking. They're talking to each other about other people, but they're not handling conflict well, and so we're getting a little bit of avoidance, and it's starting to hurt the way we, starting to hurt our morale, and it's starting to hurt how we're delivering service to our customers. So one of the measurable outcomes, of course, knowing that we're going to come in, we're going to do this, and we're going to craft results as we go through this towards that goal of getting people to work together a little bit more. That's where part of my job comes in, is to take and sort of steer people down that path. How can we take what we're seeing here? And by the way, if we're getting people that are, again, not communicating, that are engaging in passive aggressive, it's going to show up in the archetypes. It's just going to show up there. And so part of my job is to create a little bit of self-awareness and lead ourselves down that path where we can talk about, all right, how do I implement what I learned here? How do we take it and make sure this wasn't just a great meeting, but we can go do something with this tomorrow and next week and next month. And of course, part of that is going to be talking to leadership. How can they keep it alive? What should they be looking for? How should they keep the messaging going? Because part of it is going to come on to them to take these new tools themselves and make sure they stay alive and that people feel comfortable and safe, not only in that session, but putting.
Yeah, but after you've left, right? Because when you've left, they still need to
practice.
Yeah. So, talk to me about an example, maybe where a leader has found out their own patterns. Pick one, maybe talk about the caregiver, for instance. And where has that leader had to lead themselves first? And what outcomes has that changed for their team? And then as a ripple effect of that, the allowing of other people to do the same. So follow my example.
Yeah, I can think of at least a couple big ones that come from. One is simply that I want to be there to solve every problem.
Mm-hmm.
I've literally had people tell me, well, part of my job is if anybody disagrees with each other, as soon as they do, I want them to come talk to me. I'm like, if you try to do that, that's all you're going to do. Because if people
that's a lot of work.
If people get the message that every time they have any sort of dispute, they will need to come to you to talk to you about it, you are going to be very busy and you're going to be very frustrated. We need to give people the tools to handle these themselves. But if I'm talking to a leader that's maybe part caregiver, part of them, again, is driven to take care of everybody. Mm-hmm. So be a little bit of a shadow, is they'll keep burdening themselves with work because they think they have to take care of everybody.
Yeah. And then what happens to the job they're supposed to be doing? Right.
And they get super frustrated, or they find themselves either working a lot of hours or missing deadlines or submitting work at deadlines that's not the quality that it could be if they had more.
And I can see that leading to a sense of passive aggressiveness on their part. So Absolutely. Now they're frustrated and they're in this cycle, but they created it essentially.
Exactly. And so that is a big one. Again, especially because if we're talking about like the middle management, a lot of people have come from being individual performers where they did do so much. And now we're asking them, hey, you can't be everything to everybody anymore. You have to be really thoughtful about how you're going to spend your time. You have to be really thoughtful about how much you take on versus how much you delegate. So that's a big one. And the second one, of course, that comes with that is the hesitancy to have difficult conversations. Because, again, you want to be everybody's friend. You want to take care of everybody. You want to make sure everybody's always happy. That can be challenging, and it makes people not want to have difficult conversations. A, because they're scared of the result, and B, oftentimes, to be honest, nobody's really showed them how to do it very well.
Right. Oh.
They understand they can do it without being the jerk boss or the mean person. They don't really even understand. They think it's binary. Either I just let everything go or I'm, slamming my fist on the table. And so part of it is saying, yeah, we've sort of been letting things slide here a little bit. There is a way we can be much more proactive in dealing with things when they come up. And ironically, the better you are doing that, the fewer big problems you're going to have.
The fewer problems that come up. Exactly. In the CultureTalk Toolset, we have a number of materials and facilitation tools and just things that can help people to do the things that you're asking them to. So I think it's really important to understand that you're not just coming in and saying, okay, well, here it is. I'm going to help you solve this, but I'm actually going to give you supportive leave behinds, tactics, information, resources that are active and live in terms of, on a day-to-day basis, if they need support or help, they can reach into this bucket. And I think that's critical as well. Not just, well, you learned about it now. Don't you know how to do this? Don't you know how to, do a better job of leading your team or creating the kind of outcomes, that brought Brian in to begin with?
Yeah, we have a number of tangible tools, which I love, that I can leave with them and they love to. And they're really they're going to help them down the road when they need it. They can go to these and say, hey, I'm having a conflict with this person, or I'm facing this problem. I have a tool for them that's going to help them have direction in which to tackle it, and also shed some light on some potential obstacles that tend to pop up. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Everybody sort of thinks, I'm the only one in the world that has this problem and nobody can understand it.
Yeah. Right.
Again, we see this, if you do this as much as I do, you see the patterns come up. And it's, again, because we're human beings and we operate in fairly predictable ways. And these things are not unique. We have some tools. We know pretty much anything you're going to throw at me, I've heard before. And we have some tools that we can use that can help you. They've been already made. They're ready to go. I can give them to you and it's going to help you.
Yeah. What I love about what you just shared, it kind of leads us down to the second half of this equation we started talking about. And that is these patterns, we see them coming up. We see them in individuals. We also can measure them in groups and in organizational cultures. And there's huge value to helping the whole team operate more effectively, sort of within the team, but also between teams in relationship to the other departments. It's another big way that we see people, struggling or othering a whole bunch of other people who they, are being passive aggressive with, don't want to have a conflict with. So, a couple typical rubs might be, the sales folks and the engineering folks, or the marketing team, and the sales team. Boy, there's that sales team again. Let's use the finance team. Maybe they're struggling with the executive team. Who knows where that conflict might arise? But you've also kind of walked in that door and helped organizations to understand some of the challenges between teams. Tell us more about that.
And again, this is going to happen, right? This is going to happen. Another big one I see is the tech side versus the delivery side. Tech says, well, our stuff doesn't do that. And the delivery side says, well, make it do it because I need it for my customers.
Because I just told them it could.
Exactly. Yeah. So that is a big one as well. And these are natural business problems, right? We're not saying you're not going to have these business problems. You are. These are natural business problems. So how do we deal with each other when they happen? And how do we sort of break down the walls between those factions before it's the same process we talked about before. That, can start with avoidance and get all the way to, a wall, a wall being put up between, and really, people tossing grenades over the wall.
Is that right? That happens quite a lot.
Yeah. So what we do organizationally, again, is we ask everybody to reflect not on their own archetypes. And again, I don't want to be too technical, but comment not just on how they feel like they function, but how does the organization function? What's the personality of the organization? We give that to everybody. And then we bring people into the same room, cross faction. Again, the tech folks and the sales folks and the customer experience folks all together. And we're going to talk just about how, first of all, how they see the company. And we can split that, of course, we can split
that. Some slices of the different demographic and their viewpoint on what's happening in the culture, and give it those names and the framework that makes it so much easier to identify and to talk about.
And the thing I like so much about this approach, Teresa, and it took me a while to get this, as you probably remember, is that this tool is not, at its basis, is not about good culture versus bad culture, right? It's not about this is great, this is bad. It's about who we are. It is about who we are. What's our personality as a company? How do you see it? How do we see it? How do you experience it?
And I like what you said earlier. It assumes good intent.
Absolutely.
It assumes that if we're showing up in a particular pattern, we have a well-designed understanding of what we think that's going to gain, what the gain is going to be from showing up in that way. And then we have the potential to get stressed and challenged and triggered and express the other side of that same pattern. So again, not good, bad, not a good culture, bad culture, good score or bad score, but what story are we living? Exactly.
So we have our own personalities, right? And I like to think of these as, there are filters. There are filters. Our personalities are sort of, to me, are filters between the sensations we take into our body, right, and the actions how we behave. So assume we all touch a stove and we all feel it's hot, right? that's the same, but we're going to filter these messages very differently based on our personality, based on our archetypes, and based on that filtering, you're going to get different behaviors on the other side.
Yes.
So it's easy for me when I don't understand that and I don't understand your filter to assume, well, Teresa just doesn't get it.
Yeah, to judge, right? We start that judging very quickly. Again, human nature.
She doesn't get it. She doesn't understand it. She doesn't understand what we do. And we can go right down that pathway. That rabbit hole takes us to a dark place eventually. But what we're doing is shining a light on that middle part of that process, And when we get all these people from different parts of the company in the same room together, and we start reflecting on it as a whole for the company. Yeah, this is how I see this part of the personality showing up. And this is what makes us really great, by the way. This is why our customers love us. This is what I love them.
And this is why it works, right? We're in this pattern because it works.
And we'll talk about the really good things, but then a part of that might be, and usually when we see people with this strength, there's this little shadow that sometimes can come up. Do you guys see this at all? And then we start that conversation without judgment again, and without any sort of finger pointing. Just do we see this behavior pop up? If so, let's talk about it. And again, it takes some safety and it takes a little bit of skill from the facilitation side to make sure we're guiding that conversation in the right way and it doesn't get too far off. But when you do it intentionally and with that guidance of getting us to the best place, it really brings people together.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love if you could share an example, for instance, of an organization who's done the org work, and what were some of the business challenges they were using that to overcome, and how did it help their teams in the process?
Yeah, so I can think of one that I've worked with. One particular that I've worked with. It was a nonprofit, pretty big nonprofit. Mm-hmm. And this nonprofit was expanding. They were so good at what they were doing. They were being super successful. Other nonprofits were saying, hey, can you take this in? Can you take this part of it in?
Join, right? It was like,
can we join up with you? And so what started as a very clear culture and a very clear message started to get diluted. The messaging started to get lost a little bit. Mm-hmm. They were taking on different types of nonprofit work by people in different locations, and it became very hard to get that message. So part of what we did was bring everybody together and take everybody's temperature, so to speak. How do we see this? How do we see our personality? What are we trying to achieve? And it allowed the people who'd been there for a while to say, yes, this is us. But also maybe we've expanded now, and it allowed people that were coming in to say, all right, now I get it. Now I understand why people have been behaving this way, because this is who we are.
Right. And so many times I think that kind of, essentially acquisition, like we'll call it that for lack of a better word, or emerging of teams and organizations just stands to have so many road bumps. And so the real benefit of starting the process or very early on having those types of conversations, I've seen just enormous light bulbs go off for people to come to clarity and understanding and acceptance. And from that place, you can all make some decisions about what's going to be next, like what do we need to keep or lose. But unfortunately, we often see teams that don't take the time or have the tools to do that kind of analysis. And then they waste an awful lot of time finger pointing, feeling resentful, that passive aggressiveness we talked about. And so the value and the potential for this group, that was seen at the front end is diminished. And people are feeling scared, angry, hurt, or defensive. And so the opportunity for that between team thing is to really, really greatly minimize the impact of those type of negative emotions and consequences because they don't serve us. They certainly do not help us to achieve the well-intentioned organizational goals that we set out with. So how can we minimize and reduce those things is really, I think, an important question for leaders and for teams.
Absolutely. And when it comes to mergers, I always say, just because the numbers work doesn't mean the people will. Right?
Exactly.
These
Yeah.
decisions are easy to make when we look at balance sheets. Yeah, this will look great, on paper.
Yeah.
But again, humans, right, coming from vastly different cultures many times, being thrown together all of a sudden, yeah, we'll figure it out. And again, I don't think this is any from bad intentions. I think people that are behind these mergers are smart enough to understand that, but many times they lack the tools to make it work, or they even lack the awareness that there's a process that can make it work.
That there is, right, exactly, that there is a process, and it's not painful and it's not scary. And it doesn't, back to your earlier comment, it doesn't wind up in a place that's, well, you have a good culture or a bad culture. So if I think removing that fear from leaders, like the label of you haven't done this well, because that's not what happens in this conversation. It really very, very much starts from a perspective of let's understand what's going well. Let's be open to the conversation about what we could improve upon or what's been a challenge in the organization and on the team. So, Brian, how can someone find you? What kinds of support can you offer to organizations? What kinds of work, are you really well suited to deliver when it comes to team development or anything else?
Well, you've heard it if you've been on for the past half an hour. So this is what I do. What I talk about too much is I do a lot of one-on-one coaching with managers, all the way from the executive level to the manager level. How can we take this on an individual level? So I find a lot of joy in that. I spend a lot of time doing that, and then a lot of time doing the kinds of projects we've talked about. So you can find me very easily at brianrollo.com, or if you're on LinkedIn, you can just search my name. You'll come across my profile pretty easily.
Beautiful, beautiful. And, just a word from our perspective, we truly appreciate the value and the leadership and the message that you bring to the Culture Talk network. Culture Talk has certified partners in, I think, 23 countries now around the world. And as we grow this work, our doors are open for practitioners like Brian, who are running a consulting business, as well as internal teams who believe that this work would benefit the internal clients and the members of their own organization. And so we would love to have a conversation with you. We run certification cohorts regularly to bring people into the conversation and train them to deliver the work and provide them with resources and tools to do it really well. Our next one will be beginning in October, and we would love to talk to you. So if you think that this is something that would add value to your career or your consulting business, please look me up here at culturetalk.com or send me a message in the post below, and we'd love to chat with you. Thank you, Brian, for bringing another great conversation to our LinkedIn listeners. And thanks for joining us today. We hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.